G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. So today I'm going to be doing a short episode on what I call the wealth succession life cycle. Now, when it comes to succession, there's a whole lot of factors that are critical in getting it right. But the most important is understanding how the life cycle works. And over 20 years of being a financial advisor and strategically advising farming families, I started to see some trends and some information that needed putting into some sort of model. And that's where I came up with the life cycle. Now, when it comes to that cycle, there are essentially 5 phases. Now, the first phase from age 0 to age 30 is called the apprenticeship phase, or what I've called the apprenticeship phase. Now, that's the phase where the children or the young adults are going through their own apprenticeship on how to take over the family business. Now, that's an apprenticeship around not only operational issues, so knowing how to run the farming or the business operation, but also the way the family does business. So their ethics, their morals, their values. They need to understand how the financial side works, how the legal side works, how the marketing, how the business side works. And that's a really important phase because that sets the foundations of the whole succession process. And this is a part that many families fail on. And what I mean by that is 2 things. One is they let the kids come home really late, so they haven't gone through any sort of apprenticeship phase. And I just want to be clear that sending your kids away or your adult children away to go get some experience elsewhere is really valuable, but they need to know how this family or your family does business. They also make the mistake of not teaching the kids about business and finance and legal and marketing. They, at that age, try to get them to understand the working hard and the operational side, how to plant the crops, how to muster the cattle, how to buy a good bull, all those sorts of things. But it's critical you start to give them the apprenticeship on the agri-business. So as I said, that's from age 0 to 30. Now, from 30 to 40, I like to call that the hard work phase. So that's where generally you've got enough miles on the tyres and enough experience and knowledge to be actually useful. And you start working your guts out and you've got some real drive and energy. And generally for most families, by the ages of 30 to 40, they're married, got some kids on average. So there's a real drive to be able to get some responsibility and be able to build something for their family. Now, from age 40 to age 50 is what I call the pivot phase. Now, the pivot phase is absolutely critical to the long-term success of any agribusiness operation, especially intergenerationally. Now, the pivot phase is where it's where a family gets to the point where they're that age where they go, I'm either just going to keep working harder or I'm going to start to work smarter. And then why I call it a pivot is they start using their heads more than their brawn. Now, some families will do that and accelerate their business, and others will just keep working harder and not work smarter, and that business will go into a slow level out or a decline and motivational drop. But that pivot phase is super, super important. And that's why when you see farming families not handing on a farming operation until people are in their 50s or they're inheriting control, why it becomes such a problem. They've missed that pivot phase. Now, from age 50 to 60 is what I call the acceleration phase. And this is where you've got usually 30 odd years of experience. You've seen a lot of ups and downs. You've seen what works, what doesn't work. You're now working smarter, or you should be working smarter. And this is where you really start to hit your straps. Kids have generally gone to school or moved out of home, and your expenses have come down from boarding school expenses, and you're starting to think about, well, what am I going to do in retirement? What am I going to do from a succession planning point of view? So there's a real fire in the belly to do better. And then from age 60 to, say, age 75 is what I call the transition phase. And that's the phase where you need to be transitioning into your version of retirement or your parents' version of retirement. And that's a really critical phase. And I make the point of your version of retirement. By that stage, you need to be making sure that if you want to stay on the farm and keep working on the farm, that's fine, but you have plans in place to make that actually achievable. Now, that's the 5 phases, which is apprenticeship phase, the working hard phase, the pivot phase, the acceleration phase, and the transition phase. Now, there's 2 key points or 2 key, I suppose you'd say, windows in the wealth succession life cycle. Now, the first one is what I call the ideal succession launch window. So that's the launch window. Now, that's generally between ages 28 and 32. Now, I want to be really clear here. For some people, that can come earlier. For some, it can come later. But in my experience, 28 to 32 is generally where men grow up. I can remember being 27, living in London, working for a hedge fund, and I remember growing up one day. And it's a funny long story I'll tell you about one day, but it was really important. So that's generally the ideal time to transition out of the apprenticeship phase and start launching the succession. Now, what I mean by launch is starting to hand over responsibility. Now, John Moore mentioned in one of the podcasts we did a while ago on succession, he said most of the younger generation aren't after a transition of assets at that age. They're after a transition of responsibility. Now, does that mean full responsibility? Not necessarily. Maybe it does for you, maybe it doesn't, but it needs to be some responsibility. And it is critically important it starts to happen at that age. As you get older than 32, that's where family conflict starts to kick in. And the reason that family conflict starts to kick in is because generally there's a marriage, there's generally children, and that nucleus family starts to become more important than the overall family. And young men and young women who are in their 30s start to think, what am I building for myself? What have I got control of? What path can I see? And it's also critical to say as well is that once responsibility starts to get handed over, then also a clear path to full responsibility down the track. And it's something I call when then, which is for a discussion another day. Now, the second window, which is critical, is what I call the ideal succession transition window. Now, that's generally between age 58 and 65. Again, I just want to be really clear. For some people, that can be older. For some, it can be younger. But the ideal area I've seen in my experience is that 58 to 65. That's the ideal time. Now, why is that the ideal time? Well, generally, depending on when you have your children, your children will be somewhere between that apprenticeship phase and the work hard phase. So what you want to be trying to do is get that launch window matched up with the transition window. That's when you get the maximum effect of a quality succession plan. The other thing is if you start doing it over 65, the business has already started to deteriorate. Now, before people start yelling at me and saying, look, I'm 70 and I'm still sharp as a tack, I'm not suggesting that. I just remember my dad, whose nickname is Roadrunner. Dad, if you're listening, his nickname is Roadrunner. He has a whole lot of energy. When he was 60, I mentioned retirement or his version of retirement, and he almost chased me off the farm. When he was 62, I remember him clearly saying to me, Ben, I'm getting tired. I don't have as much energy as I used to. I need to start slowing down. So I can tell you as you get older, your energy levels will drop and your drive will drop. It's natural. Okay? So that's really, really important. And again, what I'm talking about today is general information. It's what I've experienced over the last 20 years. So that's the 2 ideal windows, which is the launch window and the transition window, and you want to try and match those up. Well, that's it for this week. Hopefully you enjoyed this shorter, sharper format as a bit of an experiment. I'm looking at doing more of these in the future as a sort of in-between-isode. So if you enjoyed it, drop me an email, ben@thefinancialbloke.com.au. That's it for now. We'll see you at the next episode in a week's time.